Imagine it's early 1975. You are a successful rice farmer just outside Saigon, Vietnam. You've got savings, a family, some land, the basic comfort package that suggests you've made decent decisions in life. Your bank still works. Your currency is still currency. Everything feels normal. Then one morning it doesn't. By evening, the normal that felt permanent is starting to look temporary. And suddenly you realize everything you thought was guaranteed. Your bank account, your government, your currency might not be guarantees at all. They might just be promises, and promises only work when the person making them can actually deliver. That is the moment when people start asking, what can I actually hold that doesn't depend on someone else's promise? And that question, 50 years later, is still the most important one you can ask yourself. It's the death of institutional trust. Vietnam, 1975. So here's what actually happened in Vietnam. By the early 1970s, inflation was eating away at people's savings. The government couldn't control it, couldn't stop it, and definitely couldn't admit they had no idea how to stop it. That's just not something institutions do well. They tend to be very committed to the narrative that they have everything under control, right up until the moment they don't. And that moment comes with a very particular feeling. It's not dramatic at first. It's just this creeping suspicion that the people running things might not actually know what they are redoing. That the currency you've been saving for years might not mean in 6 months what it means today. That the bank you've trusted for 20 years is actually just as panicked as you are. They're just better dressed. By 1974 and early 1975, people who had resources, merchants, government workers, people with education and exposure to the wider world started doing something very specific. They stopped thinking about holding money and started thinking about what physical assets could survive the collapse they could see coming. And they landed on gold. Not big gold bricks. Not something you'd store in a vault. Small, fractional pieces called Kim Thantails. Portable, discreet. The kind of thing you could hold in your hand and carry across a border. Here's what people get wrong about this. They think these families were converting to gold so they could trade it for bread, like some alternative barter system. No, that's not why you carry fractional gold across a border when a government is falling. You carry gold because it's the one thing that doesn't need anybody's permission to be valuable. Not the governments, not the banks, not even a customs officials, unless you're handing it to them directly. And yes, that happened too. When the North entered Saigon, the whole institutional apparatus just collapsed. Banks became buildings. Currency became paper, but gold. Gold stayed gold. It was something you could hold. Someone else could verify with their hands, and nobody could declare invalid from an office somewhere. The people who escaped by boat, the boat people. They didn't carry gold because they thought they'd become traders in Malaysia. They carried it because when you're crossing a border with nothing but what's in your pocket, gold is the only thing that speaks every language. That's the actual story, not gold as money. Gold is the only asset that doesn't require institutional permission to exist or to move. The present-day trigger, digital fences. Now, jump to 2026. And something very, very different is happening. Except it's actually designed to solve the exact same problem, just from the opposite direction entirely. Governments are building what we call CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And before your eyes glaze over at the acronym, understand what this actually means. It means the government gets to control not just whether you can spend money, but what you can spend it on, when you can spend it, and whether you're allowed to move it across borders. All of that programmed in, all of that automated, all of that verifiable by the central bank in real time. El Salvador's using Bitcoin as legal tender. China's piloting the digital yuan. The EU is developing the digital euro. The US is exploring the digital dollar. This isn't theoretical anymore. This is infrastructure being built right now. And the sales pitch is always the same. It's more efficient. It's better for fighting crime. It reduces fraud. It makes everything more convenient. All of which is true. And all of which also means the government now has tools of control that would have seemed like science fiction 40 years ago, which is fine. Great. Wonderful. Works beautifully when institutions are trustworthy and stable and not making decisions that break the unwritten rules about what governments are and aren't allowed to do. But here's the thing. That assumption about institutional stability, it's not universal anymore. And that's what people are starting to notice. The historical cycle. The death of institutional trust. Here's the pattern that shows up over and over throughout history. Institutions become trusted. They provide real services. People depend on them. The dependency becomes so complete that people stop thinking about them as human structures that could fail and start thinking about them as permanent features of reality, like gravity. Then something happens. Could be war, could be economic crisis, could be a leader deciding that the normal rules don't apply anymore. Could be the math just breaking and nobody being able to fix it without admitting they were wrong. And when that trust breaks, and this is the key part, all the assets that are denominated entirely in that institutional system suddenly become very questionable. Your bank account still shows the right number, but what the number actually means has changed. The currency is still currency, but nobody's sure if it's valuable anymore. This is called the death of institutional trust. And it follows a pattern. First comes shock. People can't believe the institution would actually fail. It's been here forever. Surely it's temporary. Surely it will come back. Then comes panic. The moment people realize it's not temporary, that's when everything breaks. It's when the runs happen. It's when you see people lining up at banks trying to pull out cash, trying to convert paper into something that doesn't depend on the institution's continued existence. Then comes pragmatism. People stop asking what things should be worth and start asking what things are worth in actual transactions on the ground. And it turns out, when institutions fail, most assets fail with them. Most things that depend on institutional backing just evaporate. But some things don't. Things that are simple. Things you can verify with your hands. Things that don't require anybody's permission. Things that work the same, whether you're in a functioning country or a country where everything just fell apart. Throughout history, people have tried to replace gold when institutional trust dies. Paper currency, backed by government promises instead of gold, doesn't work. Governments print too much, people lose faith in the paper. Cryptocurrencies without central authority doesn't work. When the power goes down and you're at a border and the person checking your documents doesn't have internet, barter doesn't work because you can't walk around carrying chickens and hoping to find someone who wants chickens and has what you need. Jewelry doesn't work because it's not standardized, and when someone asks you to prove its value, you can't. Gold works because it's stupid simple. You can verify it with your hands, you can divide it into pieces, you can carry it, and most importantly, it doesn't require anyone's permission. No government needs to recognize it. No bank needs to guarantee it. No institution needs to acknowledge it even exists. And here's the thing about institutional trust: once it breaks, it's really, really hard to rebuild. When people lose faith that their government can actually guarantee their transactions, they don't just recover from that in a few months. They remember. They become skeptical. They start thinking, well, if this happened once, what's to stop it happening again? That's the cycle. Institutions gain strength. People believe in them. Belief becomes taken for granted. Something breaks. Trust dies. People shift to assets that don't depend on belief. The institution slowly rebuilds credibility, but never quite back to where it was before. Because now, everyone knows institutions can fail. Okay, so let's actually connect this without me making predictions about the future, because that's not the point. The point is context. In Vietnam, in 1975, people converted their paper money to fractional gold because they understood correctly. As it turned out, that the institution standing behind that paper was about to vanish. They weren't wrong. The institution did fail. The people who had done the conversion, they had optionality. People who held paper, they stayed behind with the paper. Now in 2026, we're building systems that make 1975 look like the Stone Age. Digital money that you can't physically hold. Programmable restrictions. CBDCs that allow a government to see every transaction you make, to decide whether you're allowed to make it, and to literally control what you can spend your money on. Let me be sarcastic about this for a second. The government says, "You're rebuilding this to fight crime and fraud." Sure, absolutely. And I'm sure once it's built, nothing will ever go wrong. Nobody will ever use it for something other than its intended purpose. That's just how power works. You build a tool for an emergency, and then 30 years later, nobody can remember why it was supposed to be an emergency in the first place. But the tool is still there, and now it's just normal power. Historically, in this is observable fact, not prophecy. When governments build tools of control, they use them. It's not always immediately. Sometimes it takes years. But eventually, the restriction that was temporary becomes permanent. The emergency power becomes normal power. The surveillance system built to catch terrorists gets used to suppress political opposition. The digital wallet system built to fight money laundering gets used to freeze the bank accounts of people the government doesn't like. Am I saying that's definitely going to happen? No, that's not what this is about. But historically, when you see governments building comprehensive digital systems that give them complete visibility and control over transactions, you should at least understand that you're watching the construction of tools that could be used in ways you wouldn't like. And here's where it connects to Vietnam. The people who converted to gold didn't do it because they were certain the government would fail. They did it because they looked at the situation and thought, you know what? The risks are getting higher. I can't control what's going to happen politically. What I can control is whether I hold assets that don't depend on someone else's goodwill to remain valuable. Is the US about to collapse like Vietnam did? No, obviously not. The US has a much stronger institutional foundation. The military is powerful. The economy produces things. The dollar is still the global reserve currency. All of that is real. But here's the thing about institutions. They're fragile in ways that don't become obvious until they become obvious. They require consensus. They require that everyone generally agrees the system is legitimate. They require that people believe the institution won't turn on them. And that belief historically gets eroded by specific things. By inflation that the government can't control. By political divisions so deep that different groups stop feeling like they're part of the same system. By decisions from the top that break the unwritten rules about what governments are and are unallowed to do. By international shifts that change the balance of power. By all sorts of things that remove that comfortable feeling that tomorrow will look like today. So the relevant question isn't, is the US about to fail? The relevant question is, are any of the conditions that historically precede institutional erosion becoming visible? And the answer to that is, in some ways, yes. Not all the ways, not definitively. But enough ways that if you're actually paying attention, you notice that more and more people are asking the same question the Saigon rice farmers asked. What do I hold that doesn't depend on institutional promises? Gold is rising, not because of new gold discoveries, not because of new industrial uses. Gold rising is a symptom. It's a sign that people are becoming skeptical. It's what happened in 1975. It's what happened in 2008. It's what happened in 2020. It's a pattern. And here's the sarcastic part. Central banks know this pattern too. They're not stupid. So when you see central banks buying gold at levels not seen in decades, China, Russia, India, all of them accumulating gold like they're preparing for something that's not random. That's institutions doing what people do when they're unsure about whether the system will actually hold up. They're hedging their bets. So basically, the most powerful institutions in the world are quietly converting into the same asset that Vietnamese farmers converted into when their institutional system was failing. And we're all supposed to think, that's fine. It's normal. Nothing to think about. It's just institutions doing prudent portfolio management, which is technically true. But it's also the same pattern you see right before institutional trust starts too. It's become a real question instead of an assumed fact. Meaning over advice. Here's what this understanding changes about how you should think. First, stop thinking about gold as an investment. Investments generate returns. Gold doesn't. You can't eat gold. It doesn't produce earnings. You'll own it because you think, maybe, possibly, someday. The institutional system might get stressed enough that gold becomes more valuable than the alternative. That's not investment. That's insurance. Insurance against what? Against the specific scenario where the institutional system stops guaranteeing anything? That scenario might never happen. You might own gold for your entire life and never use it. It's fine. That's how insurance works. You pay for protection against things that probably won't happen. Second, when you hear gold is up because of inflation, or gold is up because of geopolitical tension, that's correct, but it's only surface level. The deeper reason gold exists as an asset class is that it's a hedge against institutional skepticism. People buy gold when they're unsure about the future of the system, not panicked, not convinced the system will collapse, just skeptical enough to want a backup plan. Third, understand this is not new. This has happened before. lots of times, lots of countries. The Ottoman Empire, the Weimar Republic, Argentina, Venezuela, North Korea, everywhere institutions have failed. People who held diversified assets that didn't depend on institutional backing fared better than people who didn't. Fourth, be skeptical of anyone who uses gold fear to sell you something. Gold dealers talking about collapse are selling you collapse. Financial advisors talking about gold as a get-rich-quick scheme are selling you fantasy. The real reason to understand gold is to understand what wealthy people already know. Institutions are real and powerful, but they're also fragile, and it's not irrational to have some assets that don't depend on institutional goodwill. Fifth, don't confuse this with conspiracy. There's no secret plot to collapse the dollar. There's no hidden elite ensuring failure. But there is a very predictable pattern. Institutions build complexity. Complexity obscures problems. Problems emerge suddenly. People panic. People shift to simpler assets. It's not secret. It's math. It's human nature. It's history. Understanding these cycles doesn't mean panicking. It means thinking like someone who's actually paying attention to history instead of just the news cycle. It means recognizing that when you see central banks buying gold, that's not random. It's institutions doing what people do when they're unsure about the system. The Vietnamese farmers who converted to Kim Than weren't doomsayers. They were pragmatists. They looked at the situation, understood what they could control and what they couldn't, and made a decision. Some of them never used that gold. Some of them did. All of them were better off for having it than they would have been if they hadn't. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now in 2026, something in the rhyme scheme is becoming visible. Institutional trust is being tested. Digital fences are being built. Central banks are buying gold. And people who are paying attention are asking the right question. If the system does get strained, what happens to my assets? The answer historically is simple. Assets that depend on the system fail with it. Assets that don't require institutional permission tend to hold value a lot better. This channel, Chill Financial Rewind, exists to help you understand these patterns without panic, without being sold anything, and without pretending the future is predictable. History is your guide, not a crystal ball. And if understanding cycles, precedent, and how people have actually survived institutional stress is your jam, well, that's what we do here. Consider subscribing if you value context over hype. No pressure. It's just a small like button you can click when you get tired of doom scrolling and want clarity instead.